She was just a student. That was how everyone described her, if they described her at all. On campus, she blended easily into the sea of backpacks and hurried footsteps, slipping unnoticed into crowded lecture halls where the hum of fluorescent lights seemed louder than the professor's voice. She preferred the back row, partly because it let her observe the world without being observed, partly because it allowed her to sketch in her notebooks without curious eyes peering over her shoulder. Most pages were filled with equations, class notes, or hastily scribbled assignments, but the margins told a different story. In those slender white spaces, she drew rotor blades, cockpits, and the muscular silhouettes of helicopters slicing across imagined skis. The Black Hawk was her favorite, a machine both brutal and graceful, born for battle yet often sent into storms to save lives. She admired its strength, its balance, its loyalty to the crew inside. For her, helicopters weren't just machines. They were symbols of freedom, courage, and precision. Her classmates didn't know this side of her. To them, she was quiet, diligent, and maybe a little too serious. She wasn't the one laughing loudly in the quad or posting photos from the latest party. Instead, she carried a steady rhythm. Wake up before sunrise, jog across the campus track, sit through lectures, eat quietly in the cafeteria, then retreat to the library where her world stretched far beyond the pages of her textbooks. But her life wasn't only about grades. Every weekend, while others spilled into malls or crowded stadiums, she disappeared. She drove a worn-out car out of the city, down back roads that led to a small airfield most people ignored. To her, that airfield was a sanctuary. There, the world was louder, the roar of engines, the thunder of blades, the shouts of mechanics carrying over the wind. And yet, it was also quieter in a way. Life made sense there. She wasn't a pilot, not yet. She didn't have the hours, the certification, or the authority. But she had something just as valuable: curiosity and discipline. She volunteered where she could, often starting with the smallest tasks, handing tools to the crew, cleaning the hangar floor, recording maintenance notes no one else wanted to bother with. Slowly, she earned trust. Mechanics began to explain what they were doing. Soldiers passing through stopped to quiz her. And pilots occasionally let her sit in the cockpit when the rotors were silent, teaching her the names of every switch. Her friends teased her for spending weekends working for free. They didn't understand that this wasn't work at all. It was breathing. Every bolt she tightened, every checklist she memorized, every late-night manual she pored over added another piece to the puzzle she was trying to solve: how to take flight. And yet, she never talked about it in class. She never told the professors who thought she was destined for academia, or the students who thought she was too shy to dream big. Her secret passion felt fragile, like glass, too precious to expose to careless hands. Still, she carried that dream with her everywhere. Sometimes, walking across campus, she would pause when a helicopter drummed overhead. While others shaded their eyes in annoyance at the noise, she stopped and listened. The sound wasn't an interruption. It was a promise, a reminder of the skis waiting for her. In the quiet of her dorm, she kept photos taped above her desk: Black Hawks hovering over floodwaters, soldiers pulling survivors into the cabin, and medevac crews carrying stretchers with speed and grace. These weren't images of war. They were images of resilience. She told herself that one day, somehow, she would be there not as an observer but as part of the crew. For now, though, she remained a student. Just a face in the crowd, another name on the roster, another girl scribbling in the back row. Her life was ordinary, almost painfully so. She worried about exams, stretched every dollar of her savings, and sometimes wondered if her dream was too far away to ever touch. But the funny thing about ordinary days is how quickly they can shatter. One phone call, one broadcast, one unexpected moment, that was all it would take. And though she didn't know it yet, the world was about to test her. Soon, her name, her quiet, hidden name, would be carried on the crackling voice of Black Hawks, announced not in a classroom, but in the middle of a storm. On campus, she blended into the rhythms of lectures and libraries, but away from it, her life took on a different pulse. Every Friday afternoon, when most students stuffed their bags for a weekend of parties or trips, she packed hers with a notebook, gloves, and an old pair of boots that had long since worn out at the toes. By sundown, she was on the road, driving her aging car toward the outskirts of the city, chasing not a social life but the low rumble of rotor blades. The airfield wasn't much to look at. It wasn't the grand kind you saw in movies, no bustling terminals, no glass towers gleaming in the sun. Instead, it was a stretch of cracked concrete, battered hangars, and the smell of jet fuel clinging to the air. But to her, it was sacred ground. She always felt her heartbeat sync with the whirring of engines as soon as she stepped past the chain-link fence. At first, she was just the student. That's what the mechanics called her. The girl who showed up on weekends, asked too many questions, and carried notebooks thicker than toolboxes. She didn't mind. She was used to being overlooked. But she was determined not to be dismissed. She swept floors without complaint, fetched coffee when needed, and stayed until her legs ached from standing. Slowly, respect replaced skepticism. The older mechanics began to teach her things: how to check hydraulic lines, how to spot the faint oil leak that others might miss, how to handle tools as if they were extensions of her own hands. Pilots passing through the hangars noticed her, too. Some teased her, "What's a campus kid doing elbow-deep in grease?" But others admired her persistence. One flight sergeant, grinning under his weathered cap, told her, "You've got Black Hawk blood in you, kid. It's only a matter of time." She laughed when they said things like that, but deep down it stirred something. Black Hawk blood. She liked the way it sounded, even if she didn't believe it fully yet. The cockpit was where her heart truly lived. Whenever she was given the chance to sit inside, even when the aircraft was grounded and silent, she treated it like a cathedral. Her fingers hovered reverently over switches, tracing the layout she had memorized from manuals. She knew she wasn't ready to fly, but she imagined it. The rumble in her chest, the lift of the machine beneath her, the world tilting as she rose into the sky. Still, her life outside the airfield was starkly different. On Mondays, she was back in lecture halls, listening to professors drone about theories and equations. While her classmates planned their internships, she doodled rotors and fuselage schematics in the margins of her notes. She felt as if she lived in two separate worlds, one gray and predictable, the other alive and full of purpose. It wasn't easy. Money was tight, and she often worked odd jobs during the week to afford gas for her weekend trips. Her hands were often nicked, and from working on machinery, a detail her classmates never noticed as she scribbled quietly in class. She told no one about her second life. It wasn't shame that silenced her, but a fierce protectiveness. Her dream was fragile, something that could be broken by a careless laugh or dismissive remark. At night, she would return to her dorm, still smelling faintly of fuel and oil, and tape new photographs above her desk. Helicopters hovering over raging floods, soldiers dangling from ropes, families clinging to safety in cabins rattling with turbulence. These images weren't just inspiration. They were reminders of why she trained, why she sacrificed. She wasn't just chasing flight, she was chasing purpose. Her friends thought she was simply avoiding parties, avoiding life, maybe even hiding from the world. If only they knew. Every weekend, she wasn't escaping life. She was preparing for it. What she didn't know was that her efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. Somewhere in a roster tucked away in a government database, her name had been recorded. Volunteer trainee, civilian support, emergency mobilization program. She had signed the forms quickly, more out of curiosity than conviction, never believing her name would matter. But names have a way of waiting for the right moment. And soon, when the world outside her campus cracked under disaster, hers would be spoken in places she never dreamed of. She was still just a student, but her double life was about to collide, and the echo of her name would travel not across a classroom, but through the cockpit of Black Hawks roaring into the sky. It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that blurred into the others, stitched together by the steady rhythm of classes, library sessions, and half-warm coffee. The campus library buzzed faintly with whispers and the clack of keyboards as students hunched over assignments. She was there too, tucked into a corner near a window streaked with autumn rain, her hair falling over her face as she notes. Her phone vibrated once. She ignored it, assuming it was another reminder about an assignment deadline. Then it buzzed again, harder this time, and suddenly the phones of nearly everyone around her began chiming, flashing, screaming in unison. The once quiet library filled with a ripple of uneasy murmurs. She pulled her phone closer and read the words that made her chest tighten. Emergency alert, severe flooding in multiple counties, evacuations, stay alert. She stared, unmoving, while others around her scrolled anxiously. A boy across the table cursed under his breath. Two girls near the exit began gathering their things, whispering about heading home. The world outside the library suddenly felt heavier, darker, as if the rain hammering on the windows was no longer harmless but a warning. And then it happened. Through the thin crackle of the emergency broadcast channel, her earbuds buzzed with a voice, not music, not news, but something more official, more urgent. The voice cut through with sharp clarity, names being called, people being mobilized, instructions rattled off as helicopters prepped for deployment. She was about to remove her earbuds when she froze. Her name. It was faint at first, muffled under static, but unmistakable. Her name spoken aloud, broadcast across the emergency channel. She blinked, convinced she was imagining it. But then it came again, clearer this time, clipped and precise. Reporting to base. Civilian trainee, her name. Repeat. Civilian trainee, her name. Her heart stopped. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. She looked around the library in disbelief, but no one else reacted. Of course they didn't. No one else had just heard their name announced by the Black Hawks. Students kept typing, flipping pages, muttering about the storm. The world inside the library hadn't changed, but her world had. The sound repeated, confirmation of the mobilization. Her hands trembled as she pulled the earbuds out, staring down at her phone. She scrambled through old emails, half-forgotten documents, and there it was, the volunteer program she'd signed up for months ago. Emergency Civilian Responder. She had thought it symbolic, maybe even ceremonial, something that would never truly matter. But it mattered now. Her phone lit up again, this time with a direct message. Report to base immediately. You are listed as essential support. Transportation will be arranged. Her mind whirled. She was just a student. She had a lecture in 30 minutes, an assignment due tomorrow. Her life was supposed to be safe, predictable, ordinary. She wasn't ready for whatever this was. Yet the words echoed in her ears, steady and undeniable. Civilian trainee. Report to base. Her legs moved before her brain caught up. She stuffed her notebook into her bag, hands clumsy, pulse racing. Around her, students glanced up, but no one stopped her. To them, she was just another girl rushing out into the rain. They didn't know her name had been called into a world that was suddenly much larger and much more dangerous. By the time she stepped outside, the storm was in full force. Rain slashed sideways across the courtyard, the sky bruised with thunderclouds. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, merging with the low, unmistakable thrum of helicopters already in the air. She lifted her head, watching dark shapes move across the storm, and for the first time she realized those weren't just machines she admired. They were calling her. Her phone buzzed again. A location pinged across the screen. A bus would arrive in 20 minutes to pick her up. No time for explanations, no chance to refuse. She stood there, soaked to the bone, staring at the storm. She whispered the words aloud, as if saying them might make them feel real. They called my name. The world of textbooks, classrooms, and lectures had vanished in an instant. Her secret passion was no longer a private escape. It was a responsibility, a summons. And whether she was ready or not, the Black Hawks had chosen her. The bus arrived exactly when the message promised it would. A plain, unmarked vehicle, its windshield streaked with rain and headlights cutting through the downpour. It pulled to a stop on the edge of campus, drawing curious stares from students huddled beneath umbrellas. She hesitated for a heartbeat, her backpack slung over her shoulder, soaked hair plastered against her face. Then a man in uniform stepped off the bus, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on her. "You," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the storm. "Civilian trainee." She nodded, though her throat was too tight to speak. He motioned for her to follow, his expression unreadable but urgent. Students nearby whispered to one another, but no one dared to ask questions. She climbed the steps, heart pounding, the weight of invisible eyes pressing on her back. Inside the bus, only a handful of people sat scattered across the seats, a mix of uniformed guardsmen and two others like her, ordinary civilians with wide, uncertain eyes. One clutched a duffel bag, the other stared at the floor as if wishing to vanish. No one spoke. The silence was thick, broken only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the low growl of the engine as they pulled away from campus. She pressed her forehead against the glass, watching familiar buildings blur past. Just an hour ago, she had been another student in a library. Now she was being carried away into something she didn't fully understand. Fear gnawed at her chest, but beneath it, another feeling stirred, something she couldn't name yet. The ride felt both endless and too short. When the bus finally turned into the base, her breath caught. Floodlights pierced the storm, illuminating a scene that seemed torn from a film. Soldiers rushed across the tarmac, their movements swift and precise. Black Hawks loomed like beasts in the night, their rotors chopping the rain into mist as crews strapped down cargo and secured harnesses. The air vibrated with sound, engines roaring, radios crackling, orders shouted against the wind. The bus doors opened, the officer from before gestured sharply. "Out, let's go." Her shoes slapped against the wet pavement as she stepped into the chaos. The scale of it overwhelmed her, the size of the helicopters, the sharp smell of fuel, the way the ground seemed to tremble beneath each spinning blade. She wanted to shrink into herself, to vanish into the storm, but the same officer pressed a headset into her hands. "Put it on," he ordered. She obeyed, fumbling with the straps until the muffled roar of the bass filtered into her ears. His voice came through clearer now. "You're on the roster. You've trained, you've logged hours, you know the basics. Tonight, you're support crew." Her mouth opened, a protest trembling on her lips. "But I'm not." He cut her off with a steady look. "No one's ever ready. We need every hand. That includes yours. Do your part and you'll save lives tonight." The words sank deep. Save lives. Not just study them in textbooks or admire the machines that carried them to safety, but play an actual part. The enormity of it shook her, but it also steadied something inside. She glanced around and realized eyes were on her. A few soldiers, older and hardened, gave her quick nods of acknowledgement as if to say, "You're with us now." It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was enough. They led her toward a Black Hawk, its rotors slicing the air, the rain whipping into her face. She climbed aboard, clinging to the metal frame as the wind pushed against her. Inside, the space smelled of oil, canvas, and adrenaline. A crew chief strapped down equipment, glanced at her, and shouted over the noise, "Don't just stand there, rookie, grab that kit and secure it." Her hands moved instinctively. Training she thought she barely remembered returned in flashes. She fastened straps, checked buckles, tightened harnesses. Her nerves screamed, but her body obeyed. Piece by piece, she proved she wasn't useless. By the time the last crate was secured, the crew chief gave a curt nod. "Good, keep up, don't fall behind." It wasn't praise, but it was trust, and for her that was enough. The Black Hawk lurched as the engines roared louder, preparing for takeoff. She sat against the cabin wall, headset clamped tight, rain streaking down the open ramp. The officer's words echoed in her mind. "Do your part, and you'll save lives tonight." Her ordinary world had ended. Whatever came next, there was no going back. The Black Hawk came alive around her. Inside the cabin, every surface vibrated with mechanical fury, each sound amplified by the headset pressed against her ears. The air smelled of wet canvas, metal, and aviation fuel, heavy and raw. Her heart thundered in time with the engine as she sat wedged against the cabin wall, a stranger in a world that demanded precision, strength, and trust. The crew worked with seamless rhythm, as if every movement had been rehearsed 1,000 times. The pilot's calm voice cut through the headset, calling out pre-flight checks. The crew chief moved quickly across the cabin, inspecting straps and cargo, double-checking the supplies that filled the belly of the helicopter. His eyes landed on her. "Don't just sit there," he barked. "Grab the med kit and secure it, tight. You don't want it bouncing when we're in the air." Her body reacted before her nerves could protest. She scrambled across the slick cabin floor, hands fumbling against the buckles. The straps fought her, stiff with cold and water, but she pulled them until the kit was locked tight against the frame. The chief gave her a sharp nod, not praise but acknowledgement. It was enough. Outside, the rain pounded harder, hammering against the rotor blades until it turned into mist. Soldiers ran back and forth on the tarmac, their silhouettes blurred in the storm. A command echoed in her headset. "All crews, prepare for immediate liftoff." Her stomach twisted. She had studied helicopters for years, dreamed of the day she might sit inside one during flight. But dreams were quiet things, safe things. This was not safe. This was real, a machine weighing thousands of pounds tearing itself into the sky, carrying lives and responsibilities that depended on every person aboard, including her. The rotors roared. The ground shuddered. Slowly, impossibly, the Black Hawk rose. She gripped the harness strapped across her chest, her breath caught between terror and awe as the tarmac fell away beneath her. Through the open ramp, the world unfolded, lights scattered like broken glass across the city, rivers swollen beyond their banks, water surging where streets had been. The crew chief leaned close, his voice sharp in her ears. "Tonight we're supply and you're extra hands. You'll follow orders, you'll stay focused. You'll not freeze, got it?" She nodded quickly. Words wouldn't come, but he seemed satisfied. Minutes into the flight, the first call crackled over the radio. Families stranded on a school roof, floodwaters rising fast. The pilot adjusted course and the helicopter tilted, sending her stomach lurching. She clung to the straps beside her, forcing her focus outward. This wasn't about fear. It wasn't about her at all. When they reached the site, the scene burned itself into her memory. Children clinging to their parents, water swirling hungrily just below the roofline. The crew moved fast, lowering ropes, tossing supplies, shouting commands over the roar of the rotors. She was ordered to help anchor gear, to steady the ropes as people were lifted one by one into the helicopter. Her arms strained, muscles screaming, but she didn't let go. The wind whipped her face, rain stung her eyes, but she held firm until the last child was hauled aboard, soaked and shivering. She wrapped a blanket around the boy without thinking, her hands moving instinctively. For a brief second their eyes met, his wide with fear, hers wide with realization. She was part of this now. The crew chief glanced at her, then spoke into the headset for the entire crew to hear. "Good work, rookie." Her breath caught. It wasn't a nickname anymore. It was recognition. As the Black Hawk lifted from the roof, she sat back, trembling, her clothes drenched and her hands raw. She wasn't a student tonight. She wasn't sketching helicopters in the margins of her notes or daydreaming about flight. She was here, inside the storm, her name etched into the rhythm of the mission. The rain beat harder against the aircraft as they banked toward their next call. Fear lingered, but it had been reshaped, molded into resolve. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. The Black Hawks had taken her in, and for the first time she wasn't just watching. She was one of them. The first mission had nearly broken her. Her arms still trembled from anchoring ropes, her heart still raced from the sight of children pulled from a rooftop seconds before the flood swallowed it whole. She thought there might be time to breathe, to collect herself. But the headset crackled again. New coordinates, urgent, multiple civilians trapped. There was no pause, no time to sit with what had just happened. The helicopter banked sharply, slamming her against the harness, and the mission rolled on. The city below looked drowned. Roads had vanished into rivers. Cars bobbed like toys in currents too strong to fight. Fires burned where floodwaters had sparked electrical shorts, their smoke twisting up into the storm. The rain was relentless, blurring everything into a smear of gray. And in the middle of it, lives waited desperate, clinging to rooftops, waving flashlights, signaling with whatever they had left. "Supplies left side," the crew chief barked. She snapped her focus forward, helping drag heavy crates toward the open ramp. The rotor wash fought against her, threatening to hurl everything back into the flood. She braced herself, secured the straps, then shoved hard as the crates tumbled out, parachutes snapping open. Below, tiny figures reached toward the falling bundles, food, water, medicine, their last hope. There was no room for hesitation. Every second wasted meant another chance for the water to win. She worked until her hands ached, sweat mixing with rain, her body screaming for rest. Still, she moved. By the second sortie, exhaustion pressed against her like a weight. Her muscles burned, her head throbbed from the constant roar of the rotors, and her stomach twisted with hunger she didn't have time to satisfy. But each time she thought she couldn't go on, the radio came alive with another call, another voice on the edge of desperation. She remembered one in particular. A mother clinging to a second-floor window, 3 children pressed against her sides. The water surged just inches below them, and the current tore at the house's foundation. The pilot hovered steady, the Black Hawk swaying in the wind while ropes were lowered. The crew chief shouted instructions, and she moved without thinking, bracing, pulling, securing, until the first child was hauled into the cabin. The second followed, then the third. Finally, the mother, crying but alive, collapsed against the floor. The moment the last harness was unclipped, the mother grabbed her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, voice shaking, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face. It was only 2 words, but they sank deeper than anything else that night. She had studied stories of rescues, dreamed of being part of them. But this was no story. This was real, messy, terrifying, and raw, and she was in the center of it. By the third mission, night had fallen. The storm grew fiercer, the winds shoving against the helicopter as if determined to tear it from the sky. Lightning split the clouds, illuminating the world in violent flashes. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, heavy, sluggish, every movement forced. But each time the crew chief barked an order, she obeyed. Secure, anchor, lift, pass. She didn't stop. Once, as she steadied a rope, the helicopter jolted violently in the wind. Her grip slipped, and for a split second panic flooded her chest. The crew chief grabbed her arm, hauling her back before she tumbled toward the ramp. "Eyes up, rookie," he snapped, voice fierce but not unkind. "We don't have time for fear." Fear? It was always there, gnawing at the edges, but something else had taken root too, resolve. She wasn't strong enough, trained enough, or experienced enough. Yet she kept moving. Not because she believed in herself, but because people below were counting on the helicopter above, counting on her. By the time the Black Hawk touched down after its third sortie, her clothes were soaked, her hands raw, and her body hollow with fatigue. Yet as she slumped against the cabin wall, she felt something she'd never known before: belonging. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was part of the crew, part of the fight. And though the night was far from over, one truth had already burned into her bones. She would never be the same again. The storm had not relented. Hour after hour, the Black Hawk flew through walls of rain, lifting people from roofs, dropping supplies into streets turned rivers, and ferrying the sick toward safety. Every sortie felt heavier than the last, not only because of the lives at stake, but because fatigue clawed at all of them. Even veterans were beginning to crack under the weight of so much urgency. And yet something inside her had shifted. The trembling student who first stepped onto the helicopter was gone. Her movements were steadier now, her instincts sharper. She knew where to stand, when to brace, how to pass gear without fumbling. She no longer needed constant direction, she anticipated it. She was learning to think like them. The crew chief noticed. Between missions, as the pilot adjusted coordinates, he leaned against the cabin wall, studying her with narrowed eyes. "You're still standing," he muttered, almost to himself. Then louder over the engine noise, "Not bad for a rookie." It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was respect. And in the language of the Black Hawks, respect was earned, not given. The next call came in more urgent than the rest. A collapsed bridge had left dozens stranded on a crumbling span, the water surging higher with every minute. The helicopter banked hard, blades thundering as it cut through the storm. When they arrived, the scene was chaos, families huddled against twisted metal, floodwaters ripping at the structure like claws. The crew didn't wait. Ropes dropped, harnesses secured, the rhythm of rescue kicking in like muscle memory. But the winds were vicious here, slamming the helicopter sideways, threatening to throw everything off balance. Supplies rattled across the floor. One of the crates broke loose, sliding toward the ramp. She saw it first. Without thinking, she dove forward, catching the crate just before it tipped into the flood below. Her body strained as the helicopter lurched, her boots skidding against the slick floor. For a moment, she thought she'd be pulled with it. "Hold it," the crew chief roared, rushing to her side. Together, they wrestled the crate back, strapping it down with brutal force. When it was secure, he clapped her shoulder hard enough to rattle her bones. His voice rang in her headset, loud enough for the entire crew to hear. "Good save, Delta." Delta. It wasn't rookie anymore. It wasn't an accident, it was a call sign. The pilot repeated it seconds later, weaving it seamlessly into commands. "Delta, anchor the next rope. Fast." She moved before the words had finished leaving his mouth, gripping the rope, bracing herself as the first evacuee, an old man barely strong enough to hang on, was lifted into the helicopter. One by one, the stranded families rose out of the storm and into the Black Hawk's belly. Each time her hands were there, steadying, guiding, pulling them in. And each time the crew chief's voice crackled through the headset. "Delta, secure the line. Delta, hand off supplies. Delta, check the harness." Her name, not the one she'd been born with, not the one written on school forms or whispered in classrooms. This one was different, sharper, heavier. A name carved out of action, earned in the teeth of the storm. By the time the last family was hauled aboard, the bridge had begun to collapse beneath them. Steel groaned, concrete cracked, and just as the helicopter lifted, the entire span crumbled into the river with a thunderous roar. For a second, everyone in the cabin sat frozen, staring down at the void where lives had clung only minutes before. Then the pilot's voice broke the silence. "Nice work, Delta. Couldn't have pulled it off without you." The words struck harder than the storm outside, not because they were dramatic, but because they were simple, true. She wasn't just extra hands anymore. She was part of the mission, a thread in the fabric of survival. Her chest tightened, but not with fear, with pride. As the Black Hawk banked toward its next call, her headset buzzed again. The command tower this time. "All crews, report status." The crew chief answered without hesitation. "Black Hawk 2-7, crew intact, civilians secured, Delta on board." Delta, spoken into the airwaves, carried through the storm, stamped into record. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a name the Black Hawks called when the storm threatened to take everything. And the storm was far from finished. The storm had been raging for nearly 24 hours. For the Black Hawks, it felt like a lifetime. Their blades had cut through sheets of rain, their engines had roared against thunder, and their crew had given everything they had to save lives hanging by a thread. And in the center of it all, a student who had stepped aboard by chance had carved her place into history. By the final hours of night, exhaustion had hollowed them out. Faces pale, eyes sunken, uniforms soaked through with sweat and rain. Yet none of them asked to stop. The calls kept coming and they kept answering. It wasn't duty alone that drove them. It was something harder to explain. The knowledge that for every voice they heard over the radio, there were dozens more waiting in silence, praying for the sound of rotor blades in the dark. Delta sat against the cabin wall, every muscle aching, hands blistered raw, yet her eyes stayed sharp. She had long since stopped counting the missions. Families, children, the elderly, the sick, all blurred together, but every face etched itself into her memory. She had stopped being afraid hours ago. Fear had been replaced by something else, certainty. Certainty that this was where she belonged. Their final call came just before dawn. A hospital cut off by water, patients stranded on the top floors, generators failing. The Black Hawk tilted into the gray horizon, racing against time. Inside, the crew moved with grim precision, ropes coiled, kits secured, no words wasted. When they arrived, the sight was surreal. The hospital rose from the flood like an island, the lower levels already swallowed by the current. Lights flickered weakly inside, but most windows were dark. Dozens of figures crowded the rooftop, waving frantically as the helicopter approached. The pilot steadied the aircraft against the raging wind. "Delta," he said firmly, "you're on harness duty. Get them up fast." Her heart thudded, but she didn't hesitate. She clipped herself in, braced at the open ramp, and fed the rope line as the first patient rose into the storm. The stretcher swung wildly, rain hammering down, but she steadied it, guiding it into the cabin where the medics were waiting. Then another, and another. Minutes blurred into chaos, stretchers, children, nurses, even a doctor refusing to leave until his last patient was secured. Through it all, Delta's hands never faltered. She worked with precision born not of training but of necessity. When the final patient was pulled aboard, the rooftop was nearly submerged. The helicopter lifted just as the flood swallowed the hospital entrance, the building groaning under the weight of the storm. For a moment, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the ragged breathing of rescued souls and the steady thrum of the Black Hawk. Then the command tower's voice cut in. "Black Hawk 27, confirm complete." The crew chief keyed his mic. "Complete, hospital secure, and command," he glanced at her, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Delta performed beyond the line tonight." The reply came back without hesitation. "Acknowledged, Delta, welcome to the record." Her breath caught. She wasn't just helping anymore. She was part of the story, stamped into the logbooks carried across the airwaves. A student no longer, a Black Hawk through and through. When the storm finally broke, the city was battered but alive. Survivors staggered from shelters, their first sight of daylight painted across broken streets and rising water lines. News cameras captured helicopters landing, families reunited, soldiers carrying the wounded. And somewhere among them, stories began to spread about a girl who wasn't supposed to be there, who became the hands that pulled strangers from death's grip. For the crew, she wasn't a legend. She was Delta. She was one of them. As the Black Hawk settled back on the tarmac, rotors slowing, she stepped down on shaking legs. The air smelled different now, no longer sharp with rain but fresh with dawn. Her clothes clung heavy, her body screamed for rest, but her spirit burned with something fierce and unshakable. She had boarded as a student. She walked away as Delta. And though her journey with the Black Hawks had only just begun, one truth would forever remain. When the storm called, she answered, and the sky itself bore witness to her name.